In the year 1390, a fleet of ships vanished without a trace in the Mediterranean, carrying not just gold and jewels, but something far more valuable to the Knights Hospitaller. No wreckage was ever found, no survivors stepped forward. It was as if the sea itself had swallowed them whole, leaving behind only whispers of a treasure too dangerous to possess. This isn't just a tale of lost riches, it's a doorway into one of history's most shadowy brotherhoods. The Knights Hospitaller began as humble healers, tending to pilgrims in Jerusalem's holy streets. But somewhere along the way, their mission twisted into something darker, something armed with swords and secrets. By the time they ruled the island of Malta, they weren't just caretakers, they were warriors, architects of an empire built on mystery. Their fortresses held vaults no outsider could enter. Their rituals were spoken in codes even the Vatican couldn't decipher. What happened to that vanished fleet is just one thread in a tapestry of enigmas. Why did the knights abandon their greatest stronghold overnight, leaving meals half-eaten on the tables? What became of the sacred relic they swore to protect, a relic rumored to hold power beyond any earthly weapon? Some say these weren't accidents or acts of war, but calculated disappearances, part of a game played across centuries. The deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes. The Knights Hospitaller weren't just defending territory. They were guarding knowledge so potent it could rewrite history, and they buried it well. This is the story of an order that defies simple explanation. A brotherhood that started with bandages and ended with battle cries. Over the next hour, we'll follow their trail from Jerusalem's bloodied sands to the hidden chambers beneath Malta's streets. We'll uncover why a group sworn to charity became masters of espionage, why their enemies whispered about curses, and whether the greatest treasure they hid wasn't gold but a truth too explosive to reveal. Stick with me, because history's greatest mysteries aren't always in the past. Sometimes they're waiting just beneath the surface, daring us to look closer. Beneath the surface of every great legend lies a truth far stranger than fiction, and the origins of the Knights Hospitaller are no exception. Officially, they began in the year 1099, just after Jerusalem fell to the Crusaders, a group of pious men offering shelter and medicine to weary pilgrims. Their first home was a humble hospital near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where the wounded and sick were tended with scraps of cloth and prayers. But look closer, and the cracks in that simple story start to show. Why did a charity of healers suddenly gain such favor with Europe's most powerful kings? Why did their earliest records speak of protecting more than bodies, even as they bandaged wounds? Some historians believe the Hospitallers were never just caregivers. They were watchers. Hidden among the pilgrims they treated were informants, collecting whispers about the Holy Land's secret, tales of lost relics, maps to forgotten tunnels beneath the Temple Mount, even rumors of an ancient script older than Hebrew. And then there's the Templar connection. Both orders emerged in Jerusalem within a decade of each other. Both answered to the Pope, yet operated like shadow governments. While the Templars guarded Rhodes, the Hospitallers guarded knowledge that may have slipped into their hands during those early, chaotic years of the Crusades. One medieval chronicle describes a Hospitaller knight smuggling a chest out of a burned mosque, its contents never listed in any inventory. Another speaks of their leaders meeting in secret with Jewish scholars, trading silver for scrolls penned in a language no one else could read. The most compelling clue lies in what they built next. Within 50 years of their founding, the Hospitallers erected fortresses not just along pilgrimage routes, but atop ruins far older, places whispered to be nexuses of power. Their stronghold at Acre des Chevaliers wasn't merely a military marvel. Its lower corridors aligned with star patterns last mapped in antiquity. Coincidence? Perhaps, but when an order starts with bandages and ends with vaults that even kings were forbidden to enter, you have to wonder, were they always meant to be more than healers? Or did Jerusalem give them something they were never supposed to find? The walls of Acre's Hospitaller fortress tell a story most visitors miss entirely. Walk through its weathered halls today and you'll see stones scarred by centuries of war. But look closer and something stranger emerges. Hidden among the cracks and faded murals are symbols that defy explanation. Geometric patterns spiral in ways that mirror constellations only visible in winter. Strange markings, neither Latin nor Arabic, curve around doorways like silent warnings. Historians often dismiss them as mere masons' marks or decorative flourishes, but when you trace their placement, a pattern emerges. These symbols cluster around chambers where the knights conducted their most secretive work. Then there's the Chamber of Whispers, tucked beneath the fortress's northeast tower. This vaulted room shouldn't exist, not by medieval engineering standards. Its walls curve inward at impossible angles, creating an acoustic anomaly. Speak softly in one corner, and your voice carries with unnatural clarity to the opposite side, while the space between remains eerily silent. Modern architects have tried to replicate the effect and failed. Was this a fluke of construction, or was it designed deliberately so that secrets shared here couldn't be overheard, even by someone standing just feet away? The chamber's ceiling offers another clue. Carved into the keystone is a single symbol, a seven-pointed star encircled by a serpent swallowing its own tail. Alchemists would recognize this as the Ouroboros, an ancient emblem of cyclical renewal. But in this context, it takes on a darker meaning. Hospitaller records from Acre mention a ritual called the Silent Communion, where knights would gather in a room where walls listened and air betrayed nothing. Could this be that room, and why would healers need such elaborate secrecy? Perhaps the answer lies in what was found and lost when Acre fell in 1291. As Mamluk forces breached the city, witnesses reported seeing Hospitaller knights hauling chests into a network of tunnels beneath the fortress. One chronicler claimed they carried not gold, but books that burned without flame, a phrase that resurfaces in later Templar trials. By sunrise, the knights were gone, the chamber empty, and the symbols on its walls defaced, all except the Ouroboros, which remained untouched. Coincidence? Or had someone ensured that particular message endured? The most haunting detail comes from an unlikely source, a Mamluk soldier's diary recovered in Cairo 2 centuries later. He describes entering the Chamber of Whispers after the battle, where he found the air thick with the scent of rosemary and salt materials medieval Europeans used to preserve parchment. But no documents remained, only the symbols humming with a vibration he couldn't explain, as if the stones themselves were waiting to speak. When the Ottoman cannons finally fell silent over Rhodes in 1522, something far stranger than defeat haunted the Knights Hospitaller. Their treasury, filled with centuries of gold, sacred relics, and documents said to hold the order's darkest secrets, had vanished overnight. Ottoman scribes recorded vast storerooms standing empty, their iron doors left swinging open as if the knights had simply walked away from their greatest wealth. But here's the mystery. Sultan Suleiman's own inventories listed only a fraction of what should have been there. Missing were chests of Byzantine gold, jeweled swords gifted by kings, and most intriguing of all, an archive sealed with lead that the knights referred to as the Silent Testimony. Rumors swirled immediately. Some claimed the treasure had been smuggled onto ships under cover of darkness, sent ahead to their new stronghold in Malta. Others whispered of a secret pact that Suleiman, despite his victory, had allowed the knights to spirit away certain items too dangerous to possess. A Spanish mercenary's memoir from the siege describes watching Hospitaller knights lowering crates into a well near the Street of the Knights, their contents hidden beneath layers of salt and quicklime. When Ottoman soldiers later dredged it, they found nothing but a handful of corroded chains. Modern treasure hunters have fixated on 2 tantalizing leads. The first points to Malta, where the knights relocated after Rhodes. Beneath Valletta's streets, their archives mention a vault beneath the vault, accessible only through a labyrinth of cisterns. Divers exploring these watery tunnels in the 1990s reported finding strange markings on the walls identical to those in Acre's Chamber of Whispers. The second theory is far more radical. A coded letter discovered in a Portuguese monastery suggests part of the treasure might have crossed the Atlantic, entrusted to a splinter group of knights who vanished into the jungles of Brazil. Proponents point to a 17th-century map showing a Hospitaller cross carved near a remote Amazonian waterfall, though no expedition has ever confirmed its existence. But the most compelling clue lies in what the Ottomans didn't find. Among the missing items was a relic known as the Crown of Thorns, not the famous one in Paris, but a smaller, darker circlet said to have been forged in Jerusalem before the Crusades. Hospitaller texts describe it as a key, not a shrine. Was their true treasure not gold, but something far older, something they'd been guarding since their earliest days in the Holy Land? Perhaps the answer lies in a final, cryptic entry from the Ottoman archives. On the day Rhodes fell, a ship flying no flag was seen drifting beyond the harbor, its sails stained black with something that wasn't paint. By dusk, it had dissolved into the horizon like a mirage. Beneath the sun-baked streets of Valletta lies a world untouched by time, a maze of tunnels so vast, historians still argue over its true purpose. The Knights Hospitaller carved these passages deep into Malta's limestone bedrock, claiming they were solely for defense against Ottoman attacks. But the deeper you venture, the harder that explanation becomes to swallow. Take the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, a prehistoric burial site the Knights repurposed. Its walls ripple with a resonance that distorts sound, creating whispers where none should exist. Workers renovating the site in 1934 reported tools vanishing overnight, only to reappear in chambers no blueprint had ever recorded. Then there's the Gallery of Shadows, a narrow corridor lined with alcoves just wide enough to hold a standing figure. Locals swear on moonless nights you can hear the clink of armor echoing from its depths, though no living soul walks there. Modern scans reveal anomalies the Knights couldn't have engineered alone. Infrared imaging shows hollow spaces behind walls marked with the same 7-pointed star found in Acre. One chamber, discovered accidentally during sewer repairs in 2012, contained nothing but a circular stone slab etched with symbols matching descriptions of the silent testimony from Rhodes. Most chilling, the carbon dating placed the slab's carving centuries before the Hospitallers arrived in Malta. Folklore here isn't just superstition, it's a living archive. Elderly Maltese still recount tales of the Cavaliere Fantasma, ghostly knights seen guarding doorways that vanish when approached. In 1988, a tour guide photographed a shadowy figure in full Hospitaller regalia near the Lascaris war rooms. Experts dismissed it as a trick of light until historians noticed the figure's surcoat bore a crest discontinued in 1593. The most compelling evidence comes from the knights themselves. A coded ledger in Valletta's archives references a second city beneath Malta, accessible only through the door that breathes. Divers exploring underwater caves near the island's coast have reported currents strong enough to suggest vast hollows beneath the seafloor. Could the Hospitallers have been custodians of something far older than their order, something that required tunnels not just to hide treasure but to contain it? Among the most enigmatic treasures the Knights Hospitaller swore to protect was a relic both sacred and sinister, the mummified finger of St. John the Baptist, their patron saint. Encased in gold and crystal, it resided in their chapel on Malta for centuries, until Napoleon's forces stormed the island in 1798. When the smoke cleared, the finger was gone, but this wasn't just another lost artifact. Those who'd handled it spoke of nightmares that didn't fade with dawn, of inexplicable fevers, and in at least 3 documented cases, deaths that defied medical explanation. A French officer who pocketed it during the looting reportedly threw himself into the sea 2 weeks later, screaming about the voice in the bones. The relic's origins are as mysterious as its disappearance. Medieval chronicles claim it was brought to Jerusalem by Byzantine monks in the 8th century, hidden inside a hollow crucifix. When the Hospitallers took possession during the Crusades, their records describe it with unsettling reverence, not as a mere holy object, but as something that listens. Rituals surrounding its care were peculiar even by medieval standards. Only the Order's Grand Master could touch its container, and even then, while wearing gloves lined with silver thread. Guards posted near its chapel swore they heard whispering from the sealed reliquary, though no one stood inside. Napoleon's men weren't the last to encounter its curse. In 1836, a Maltese fisherman claimed to have dredged up a gold casket matching the relic's description near the island's Comino Channel. Within days, his entire family fell ill with a sickness doctors couldn't identify, their skin turning gray as stone. The casket vanished again, but not before a Russian diplomat stationed in Malta sent a frantic letter to St. Petersburg mentioning the Baptist's warning. This fuels speculation that the relic eventually reached Russia, perhaps hidden among Orthodox Church treasures during the chaos of the Napoleonic Wars. The strongest evidence comes from an unlikely source, a 1923 inventory of the Kremlin armory, where a clerk noted a darkened digit in a shattered crystal vial, stored alongside other seized religious artifacts. The entry was later crossed out, but not before a junior archivist transcribed it. That transcript surfaced decades later in a KGB vault with a handwritten addendum. Subject exhibits anomalous resonance. Recommend transfer to Facility D. Whether this referred to the finger or some eerie imitation remains unknown. But one detail chills historians. The archivist who found the note died suddenly a week later, his official report citing cardiac arrest, while his private diary mentioned dreams of drowning in honey. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't where the relic went, but why the Hospitallers guarded it so fiercely. Some scholars suggest it wasn't merely a sacred remnant, but a key, like the crown of thorns, another object they called a key, not a shrine. Keys open doors, and if the Knights Hospitaller spent centuries hiding doors, what might they have been keeping locked away? The Mediterranean has swallowed countless ships over the centuries, but few disappearances haunt historians like the Phantom Fleet of 1306. That autumn, 7 Hospitaller galleys departed Cyprus laden with recruits, gold, and according to a cryptic entry in the Grand Master's ledger, 6 sealed burdens from Acre. They were bound for Rhodes, a routine voyage that should have taken 10 days. By the time winter storms subsided, not a single plank of those ships had washed ashore. No distress signals were recorded, no survivors ever surfaced. It was as if the sea had opened its jaws and closed them again without a trace, yet whispers persisted. A Venetian merchant's log from that era mentions spotting Hospitaller sails near Crete days after the fleet vanished, but flying inverted, a universal signal of distress or mutiny. Even stranger, Cretan fishermen reported seeing flames on the horizon the same night, though no storm clouds darkened the sky. For centuries, the official record blamed a sudden squall, but modern meteorologists have scoured climate data and found no evidence of foul weather along their route. The mystery deepens when you consider what or who might have been aboard. Those sealed burdens from Acre almost certainly weren't treasure chests. Hospitaller cargo manifest from that era used specific terminology for gold and relics. Some scholars believe they were documents, possibly fragments of the books that burned without flame, smuggled out before Acre fell. Others point to a darker theory, defectors. 1306 was the year the Templars began their desperate flight from French persecution, with legends placing some survivors in Scotland. Could a faction of Hospitallers have joined them, stealing away under cover of their own disappearance? Sonar scans off Crete's eastern coast add fuel to the fire. In 2019, marine archaeologists discovered a peculiar cluster of objects half buried in the seabed, 7 oblong shapes spaced evenly apart, their dimensions matching 14th century war galleys. But when divers investigated, they found no wood, no iron, just smooth stone formations unlike any natural geology in the region. The team's lead scientist described them as too precise to be random, too ancient to be man-made. Strangest of all, the site lies directly beneath a stretch of water Greek sailors still call O Drokos tis Maltes's the Maltese dragon. Perhaps the truth lies not in the depths, but in a faded footnote from a Templar prisoner's confession during Philip the Fair's purge. The scribe recorded, then hastily crossed out, a phrase about the Hospitaller brothers who walked into the sea. Whether metaphor or madness, it chills the spine. Because if those ships didn't sink and didn't affect what other fate could have befallen an entire fleet without leaving a single whisper behind. In the winter of 1318, a fire ripped through the Hospitaller commandery on Rhodes, consuming its library in a single night. Or so the official records claim, because hidden in the ashes was a scandal so explosive, even the knights dared not speak its name. A manuscript penned by none other than Grand Master Fawkes de Villaret, the very man who'd led them to victory against the Turks. Its title, The Serpent and the Sepulchre, eyewitness accounts from the few who glimpsed its pages describe a text that flirted with heresy. Villaret didn't just question church doctrine, he wove together threads of Gnosticism, Sufi mysticism, and something darker, a belief that Christ's true teachings had been buried not in rock but in plain sight. Most shocking was his claim that the Hospitaller's sacred duty wasn't to protect relics, but to unseal the mouth of the forgotten teacher, a phrase scholars still debate. Was he referencing John the Baptist, some lost gospel, or something far older? The Vatican's reaction was swift and brutal. Inquisitors arrived within weeks, seizing every copy they could find. Yet whispers persisted that one survived, smuggled out by Villaret's loyal secretary. A man who vanished into the Alpine passes with nothing but a mule and an iron-bound chest. Centuries later, a cryptic reference resurfaces in the diary of a Renaissance book hunter, boasting of a transaction with black-robed men who paid in unmarked gold for a codex matching the manuscript's description. The trail goes cold in Rome, where the Vatican's Archivum Secretum holds documents even historians aren't permitted to see. But the real mystery isn't just the text's survival, it's why a Grand Master would risk everything to write it. Villaret wasn't some fringe radical, he was the architect of the Knights' Golden Age, the strategist who turned Rhodes into an unconquerable fortress. Unless, of course, he'd stumbled upon something within the Order's own vaults that demanded revelation. A 1394 inventory from Malta mentions a Book of Seven Seals kept in the Grand Master's private chapel, its pages immune to flame. Was the Serpent and the Sepulchre a copy, a companion, or something meant to replace it? The most tantalizing clue lies in an overlooked footnote from a Vatican scribe in 1721. Noting that a Rhodian heresy had been moved to a restricted section following an incident where two librarians fell ill after handling it. Their symptoms, blisters forming letters on their skin letters that matched a phrase from Villaret's alleged text, "The gate swings inward." Whether the manuscript still exists behind those locked doors, we may never know. But one thing's certain, when a warrior saint like Villaret starts speaking of serpents and sepulchres, history leans in to listen. Among the strangest documents ever recovered from the Hospitaller archives is a single parchment page, its edges blackened as if rescued from fire. Dated 1498, a full 24 years before Rhodes fell, it bears no signature, only an insignia scholars believe belonged to Grand Master Pierre d'Aubusson. The text is brief, written in cipher, but its decoded contents chill the blood. When the moon wears the serpent's hue, the lion's den shall drink the sea. At first glance, it reads like medieval superstition, the kind of apocalyptic rambling common in that era. But consider the date, December 10, 1522, the night Rhodes finally surrendered to Suleiman's forces. Contemporary accounts describe an eerie lunar eclipse staining the sky copper red, a phenomenon sailors still call a blood moon. The lion's den, Rhodes' coat of arms, featured the beast prominently. As for drinking the sea, Ottoman sappers had spent weeks tunneling beneath the city's walls, only to accidentally breach an underground aquifer. By dawn, entire sections of the fortress were underwater. Coincidence, perhaps, but Dauberson was no backwater mystic. He'd spent years studying astronomy under Jewish and Arab scholars in Spain, even corresponding with Toscanelli, the navigator whose maps guided Columbus. Some historians argue the prophecy was no supernatural warning, but a sophisticated celestial calculation, an early attempt to predict eclipses using Arabic star tables. Others point to darker influences. The serpent's hue phrasing mirrors descriptions in Gnostic texts of the Ouroboros, symbolizing cycles of destruction and rebirth. The parchment's back holds another riddle, a series of numbers matching the layout of Rhodes' harbor defenses, as if someone had calculated exactly where to strike. Most damning, Suleiman's fleet attacked those very positions first. Was this prophecy or espionage? One detail haunts researchers. The document was found sealed inside a lead tube beneath the Grand Master's palace in Malta, placed there years after Rhodes fell. Why preserve a failed prediction unless it wasn't a prediction at all? Unless it was a message one meant for future nights, warning that some defeats aren't accidents but part of a far older game. The whispers begin with a death in Venice, an event so ordinary for 1493. It would have faded into history if not for the diary of a sharp-eyed physician. Doge Agostino Barbarigo, ruler of the Serene Republic, collapsed during a feast, his skin mottled blue as winter ice. The court doctor noted foam tinged with blood at his lips, muscles locked in agony, symptoms he'd seen only once before in a sailor who'd eaten spoiled shellfish. But Barbarigo had dined on food tasted by servants, and one detail haunted the physician's notes: a silver cup gifted by Hospitaller envoys weeks prior, its interior etched with faint spirals, like the grooves of a hunting snail's shell. Venetian archives blame malaria, yet across Europe a pattern emerges. French Duke Charles of Bourbon convulses mid-sermon in 1527 after refusing to cede lands to the knights. An Ottoman admiral clutches his throat aboard ship in 1541, his last words accusing the cross-wearing shadows in his crew. In each case, the symptoms defy medieval medicine: pupils contracting to pinpricks, limbs stiffening then going limp, deaths timed with eerie precision. Modern toxicologists recognize these as hallmarks of alkaloid poisons, nightshade perhaps, or a refined form of hemlock. But here's the catch: these toxins degrade swiftly. By the time any investigating physician arrived, evidence would have vanished like smoke. The knight's own records fuel speculation. A 1516 inventory from Rhodes lists gardens of medicinal simples, including belladonna and monkshood plants with healing properties in tiny doses, deadly in larger ones. More damning is a confiscated letter from a disgraced knight, complaining of being reassigned from the apothecary's quiet work to frontline combat. Historians long dismissed it as metaphor until a 2008 chemical analysis of a stain on the parchment tested positive for arsenic sulfide. But could an order sworn to protect life really sanction murder? Perhaps the answer lies not in morality but practicality. The Hospitallers weren't just warriors, they were diplomats navigating a world where open war risked annihilation. When the Sultan of Cairo demanded the surrender of Margat Castle in 1285, Grand Master Jean de Villiers reportedly sent envoys bearing gifts of honey and spices. The Sultan died within the week, his successor abruptly withdrawing siege plans. Coincidence, maybe, but in the margins of Villiers' personal psalter, a scribe later found a sketch of a scorpion beside Psalm 91. "Thou shalt tread upon the lion and adder." The darkest clue comes from Malta's underground chambers. Beneath Fort St. Angelo, restorers uncovered a narrow cell in 1989, its walls lined with ceramic jars still bearing traces of a viscous residue. Lab tests identified aconite, a wolfsbane derivative so potent 1 gram can kill 30 adults. Most chilling was the jar's placement, not in a medical storeroom but adjacent to a spy's tunnel leading straight to the Grand Master's quarters. Perhaps the truth isn't that the knights were poisoners, but that they understood a brutal truth of their era. Sometimes the quietest weapons leave the loudest echoes. And in a world where crowns toppled over a goblet's rim, survival demanded mastering shadows as well as swords. On the rugged Turkish coast where the Aegean meets the Mediterranean stands a castle that refuses to surrender to silence. Bodrum's Castle of St. Peter, built by the Knights Hospitaller in 1402, is a postcard-perfect fortress by daylight, its honey-colored stones glowing under the sun. But as dusk falls, something shifts. Visitors climbing its ramparts after dark report footsteps echoing where no one walks, the clank of unseen armor, and faint chants in medieval Latin rising from empty chapels. Locals call them the Sun Nerbitzeiler, the last garrison. Archaeologists digging beneath the castle's courtyard in 2011 uncovered a grim surprise. A mass grave holding at least 200 skeletons, their bones jumbled together as if tossed hastily into the earth. Carbon dating places the bodies squarely in the Hospitaller's era, but the cause of death remains hotly debated. Some skeletons show blade marks consistent with combat, while others bear the telltale lesions of bubonic plague. A lead coffin at the center held a knight in full regalia, his hands clutching a rusted dagger and a scrap of parchment inscribed with a single word, contagio. Historians have pieced together a chilling scenario. In 1523, as Rhodes fell to the Ottomans, Bodrum became a desperate refuge for fleeing Hospitallers. But plague traveled with them. Ottoman records mention ships burning offshore to cleanse the pestilence, while a surviving knight's letter describes sealing the castle gates to quarantine the sick, only for the healthy to sicken days later. Did the garrison turn on each other in madness, or was there a darker intervention? A Spanish mercenary's memoir from the era claims the knights' own officers began quieting the afflicted with cold steel to prevent the Ottomans from discovering their weakness. Yet the ghost stories defy simple explanations. Witnesses describe apparitions in Hospitaller tunics marching in perfect formation along the battlements, behavior unlike plague victims or battle casualties. Thermal imaging during a 2018 paranormal investigation recorded inexplicable cold spots precisely where the mass grave lies beneath. And then there's the chant. Linguists analyzing recordings identified it as a rare variant of the Dies Irae, a medieval hymn about divine judgment, but with one disturbing alteration. The lyrics pleaded not for mercy but for silence. Perhaps the most unsettling clue lies in the castle's architecture. Beneath the chapel, restorers found a hidden chamber with walls coated in a black, tar-like substance. Lab tests revealed it wasn't pitch or paint, but a mixture of charcoal, salt, and crushed herbs long used in medieval plague masks. Was this a hospital or a laboratory? A 1524 inventory lists shipments of Venetian glass vessels and Egyptian salts to Bodrum, items apothecaries used to distill remedies or poisons. The truth may lie between history and haunting, because if those ghosts are real, they aren't just remnants of tragedy, they're keepers of a secret the knights took extraordinary measures to bury. And in the hush of Bodrum's moonlit corridors, it almost sounds like they're still trying to warn us. In the musty archives of a Venetian monastery, tucked between ledgers of grain shipments and troop deployments, lies a document that shouldn't exist, the Cypriot Codex. At first glance, it's just another 15th century Hospitaller ledger, its pages yellowed with age, filled with meticulous records of supplies and repairs. But turn to the back and the ink shifts dramatically. Here, amid columns of numbers, someone sketched a series of rough but precise nautical charts, coastlines jagged as dragon's teeth, islands marked with symbols that match no known medieval map. What makes these sketches so explosive? Three details defy explanation. First, the longitude and latitude markings, crude but eerily accurate for an era when most sailors navigated by stars and guesswork. Second, the repeated appearance of a cluster of islands west of the Azores Islands that wouldn't appear on European maps for another 50 years. And third, a single phrase scrawled beside them in faded Latin, Hic sunt dracones non solum fabulae. Here be dragons not merely of fable. Historians are divided. Some argue it's a coded record of secret Hospitaller bases, perhaps way stations for fleeing Templars after their order's destruction. Others point to the sketch's resemblance to Caribbean coastlines, suggesting the knights might have stumbled upon the New World long before Columbus. The most tantalizing clue, a 1706 inventory from Malta, mentions a Caribbean chest stored in the Grand Master's vault, its contents listed as charts and curiosities. That chest vanished when Napoleon invaded, but not before a British officer's journal noted its lock bore the same 7-pointed star found in Acre's hidden chamber. Modern technology only deepens the mystery. Spectral imaging revealed layers of erased text beneath the map's coordinates matching the volcanic island of Ni Kameni near Santorini, a place Greek myths called the Forge of Hephaestus. In 2014, divers exploring its underwater caves found medieval anchors and a rusted sword hilt engraved with a Hospitaller cross. Were the knights using volcanic islands as navigational markers? Or were they searching for something far older, something the Codex's author dared not name outright? The truth might lie in who compiled the ledger. Marginal notes suggest it belonged to Fra Antoine de Paul, a knight later accused of heresy for his unnatural interest in pagan cartography. His trial records mention a midnight voyage to an uncharted reef where he allegedly retrieved a stone that hummed. Though condemned, de Paul escaped execution, vanishing, some say, aboard a ship bound westward with sails dyed black. Whether he found what the Codex hints at, we may never know. But one thing's certain, in a world where treasure maps were worth kingdoms, the Hospitallers guarded theirs with more than silence. They buried them in plain sight, knowing few would think to look between the lines of a grocer's accounts. The year 1437 should have been a time of triumph for the Knights Hospitaller. Rhodes stood strong, their fleet dominated the Mediterranean, and Grand Master Jean de Lastic had just brokered a fragile peace with the Mamluks. But that autumn, whispers began spreading through the order's ranks, whispers of something impossible. Two identical men, both wearing the Grand Master's insignia, both issuing conflicting orders, were seen days apart in ports hundreds of miles apart. In Famagusta, a Jean de Lastic presided over the knighting of new recruits. In Marseille, another Jean de Lastic stormed into a merchant's house demanding unpaid tithes. Neither could have been an impostor, both knew secrets only the real Grand Master would possess. Witness accounts preserved in Venetian archives paint a surreal picture. The Marseille version reportedly bore a scar above his left eyebrow from an old Saracen arrow, while the Famagusta figure lacked it, until a servant swore he saw the mark appear and vanish like a trick of the light. More unsettling were their behaviors. The Marseille Lastic raged about betrayals in the shadows, while his Cypriot counterpart calmly assured knights that the Serpent's path is secure. Both signed documents with nearly identical handwriting, though experts noted subtle differences. The Marseille signatures slanted as if written by a left-handed man mirroring right-handed strokes. Historians have proposed three theories. The first suggests an elaborate impersonation, perhaps by a disgraced knight seeking revenge. But no contemporary sources mention any look-alike within the order, and the logistical hurdles of mimicking Lastic's mannerisms so precisely seem insurmountable. The second theory points to twin brothers, a phenomenon well documented in noble families of the era. Yet Hospitaller initiation records list only one Jean de Lastic, and his childhood in Auvergne was extensively chronicled by monastery scribes who never noted a sibling. Then there's the third explanation, one that emerges from the margins of medieval texts. A Moldavian chronicle from that same year describes a shadow walker haunting the Black Sea coast, a being capable of wearing men's faces as a cloak. More damningly, Lastic's personal diary from 1436 mentions a strange encounter in Rhodes catacombs where he reportedly discovered a chamber filled with mirrors that showed what was and what might be. The entry breaks off mid-sentence, the next page torn away. The mystery deepens when we examine what followed. Within months of these sightings, the real Lastic, assuming either version was real, authorized construction of a secret annex beneath the Grand Master's palace. Workers' logs mention a hall of reflections lined with polished black obsidian, its purpose never recorded. That same year, the Knights suddenly escalated their raids on Ottoman ships carrying glassmakers and metallurgists, prisoners who vanished into the dungeons of Rhodes without trial. Perhaps the most chilling clue lies in a letter from Lastic's successor decades later, warning a fellow knight about the doppelganger's curse. He claims Lastic confessed on his deathbed that he'd met himself in the dark places, and that the encounter left him certain of one terrible truth: some masks once worn can never be removed. Whether this was delirium or confession, we'll never know. But in the vaults of Malta, one artifact remains, a 15th century portrait of Jean de Lastic, where careful restoration has revealed a second face faintly visible beneath the paint, its features twisted in a scream. Beneath the sun-scorched streets of Birgu, Malta, lies a secret that blurs the line between science and sorcery. In 2008, archaeologists restoring a 16th century Hospitaller warehouse stumbled upon a cellar that reeked of sulfur centuries after its last fire burned out. The walls were stained with eerie greenish streaks, the floor littered with shattered flasks and twisted copper pipes. But it was the residue that told the true story: traces of mercury and sulfur fused into the stone, the telltale fingerprints of alchemy. This wasn't some backroom hobby. The Knights' records mention a laboratorium beneath Birgu's fortifications, staffed by brothers handpicked for their knowledge of the lesser and greater works. One inventory lists shipments of quicksilver and antimony materials medieval alchemists believed could unlock transmutation. Even more telling, a 1552 letter from Grand Master Juan de Homs to a shadowy figure referred to only as the Phoenix, discussing the golden harvest and requesting more ascension powder. Historians long dismissed it as code for bribes or supplies until those cellar findings proved the Knights were literally cooking gold. The process they attempted was no medieval fantasy. It mirrored the teachings of Paracelsus, the Swiss occultist who frequented Malta in the 1530s. His manuscripts describe a mercury-sulfur amalgam that, when heated in precise conditions, could ripen base metals into noble ones. But here's where the story twists. Chemical analysis of the Birgu residue revealed an anomaly. The sulfur wasn't local. Its isotopic signature matched volcanic deposits from Mount Etna, suggesting the Knights went to extraordinary lengths to source materials they believed held mystical properties. Perhaps the most chilling discovery was a lead ingot recovered from the site, its surface pocked with strange golden flecks. Initial tests suggested gilding, but deeper analysis showed the gold wasn't applied, it had bonded at a molecular level. Modern metallurgists can't explain it. The closest parallel comes from a banned Arabic alchemy text the Hospitallers confiscated during a raid on an Ottoman ship, which spoke of awakening the sun within the metal. But why would an order sworn to poverty chase the philosopher's stone? The answer might lie in their greatest vulnerability: Rhodes. After losing their island stronghold in 1522, the Knights were desperate for funds to fortify Malta. Alchemy wasn't just about wealth, it was about survival. And if the flecks in that lead ingot are any indication, they might have gotten closer to their goal than history admits. Among the charred manuscripts found in the cellar, one fragment stands out: a sketch of a serpent coiled around a crucible, its tail forming the Hospitaller cross. Beneath it, a single phrase in smudged Latin: non aurum sed libertas, not gold but freedom. Whether they sought to buy their independence or forge something far stranger, one thing's clear. In the shadows beneath Burgu, the knights weren't just praying for miracles. They were trying to manufacture them. The town records of Vienne from the year 1310 contain an entry so bizarre, even modern historians pause when they read it. On the morning of July 3rd, the local bishop sent a frantic message to the Pope. The Hospitaller Chapel of St. John had vanished, not crumbled, not burned. Vanished as though plucked from the earth by some unseen hand. Witnesses described riding past the site the previous evening and seeing its lanterns glowing as usual. By dawn, only a depression in the ground remained, the stones so cleanly gone that not even mortar dust clung to the grass. What makes this disappearance stranger still are the frescoes that once adorned its walls. According to a monk's sketchbook rediscovered in Avignon's archives, the chapel's interior was covered in apocalyptic scenes far darker than typical medieval imagery. One depicted a seven-headed dragon with crowns bearing Hospitaller crosses. Another showed angels pouring vials over Jerusalem, except the liquid wasn't wrath, but what the scribe labeled scientia occulta, hidden knowledge. Most chilling was a third panel, illustrating knights kneeling before a door shaped like a gaping mouth, its lintel inscribed with the words Hic dormit veritas, here lies truth sleeping. For centuries, scholars assumed the chapel was destroyed during the suppression of the Templars, its records deliberately purged. But in 1984, workers excavating a wine cellar near Vienne's Old Market Square broke through into a hollow space. Their shovels scraped against painted plaster fragments matching the monks' descriptions, including a dragon's scaled wing. Before authorities could investigate, the site mysteriously flooded overnight, the water rising too rapidly for natural causes. Sonar scans later revealed an intact chamber 30 feet below street level, its entrance blocked by what engineers called a wall that shouldn't be there, 12 feet of densely packed stones bearing chisel marks consistent with 14th century masonry techniques. Recent ground-penetrating radar adds another layer to the puzzle. The scans show not just one hidden room, but a network of tunnels radiating outward like spokes, some leading toward the ruins of a Roman temple dedicated to Cybele, a goddess associated with prophecy and underground rites. Could the knights have repurposed much older secrets? A 1309 letter from a Hospitaller commander mentions strengthening the foundations in Vienne after discovering pagan hollows. The most tantalizing clue comes from an unlikely source, a tax collector's ledger from 1312. In neat script, it lists the Hospitallers paying tithes for land where no building stands. The entry continues for 7 years, long after the chapel's supposed disappearance. Unless, of course, the chapel wasn't destroyed at all, but deliberately buried, its frescoes still waiting in the dark to deliver their message. After all, dragons in medieval symbology weren't just beasts, they were guardians. And what better place to hide a truth too dangerous for daylight than beneath the feet of those who'd never think to look down? In the winter of 1263, a scandal erupted in the Rhineland that threatened to tear the Hospitallers apart from within. A disgraced brother named Heinrich von Ochen stood before a church tribunal, his voice trembling as he described midnight rites in a commandery cellar, black-robed knights chanting psalms backward, a crude effigy with ram's horns mounted where the altar cross should be. Most damning was his claim that the initiates drank wine mixed with ashes, whispering oaths to a figure they called the true Grand Master. These weren't just accusations of corruption. They were charges of outright Satanism. Local lords eagerly amplified the claims, circulating lurid pamphlets depicting Hospitallers sacrificing goats under inverted banners. But historians have long debated whether this was genuine heresy or political sabotage. The timing is suspicious. The accusations surfaced just as the knights were negotiating rights to strategic toll bridges along the Rhine, properties fiercely contested by regional nobility. One noble's private letters, discovered in a Mainz archive in 1987, even boasted of paying Heinrich 30 silver marks for his performance. Yet some details resist easy dismissal. Excavations at the accused commandery in 1992 revealed a subterranean chamber with an unnerving feature. A stone slab set at a precise 15-degree tilt, its surface grooved in spiral patterns matching medieval descriptions of devil's altars. More perplexing are the faint traces of myrrh and sulfur detected in the mortar, substances medieval grimoires associated with necromantic rites. The Order's response adds another layer of intrigue. Rather than denying the allegations outright, Grand Master Hugues de Revel issued a terse proclamation condemning false brethren who corrupt our rites. His choice of words is telling. Corruption implies the existence of something pure to distort. Was there a kernel of truth beneath the hysteria? A fragmentary manuscript from Montpellier's medical school library hints at darker currents. It describes a Hospitaller splinter group practicing the inverted medicine, a reference some scholars interpret as early anatomical studies, others as ritualized poisonings. Perhaps the most chilling artifact sits quietly in a Trier museum, a 1284 reliquary confiscated from the accused knights. Its enamel work shows St. John the Baptist with his head miraculously reattached, but X-rays reveal a second image beneath the paint. The same saint holding his own severed head like a lantern, its mouth stretched in something between a grin and a scream. Whether this was heresy, political theater, or something far older masquerading as both, one thing's certain: when an order sworn to heal bodies starts dabbling in inverted sacraments, even their enemies pause. Because the scariest monsters aren't those who openly worship darkness. They're the ones who learn to light their candles with hellfire. On a moonless night in 1548, Ottoman sentries guarding the siege lines around Malta reported something impossible. A lone Hospitaller knight standing atop the ramparts of Fort St. Elmo, his armor glowing like swamp gas. By dawn, he'd vanished, but the tale spread like wildfire. For centuries, locals whispered about the Lumisture, the glowing sentinel, said to appear whenever the knights faced impossible odds. Was this medieval psychological warfare, a trick of torchlight on polished steel, or something far stranger buried in the Order's forgotten experiments? The armor's description in Maltese folklore is unnervingly specific. Witnesses claimed it shimmered with a blue-green radiance, pulsating faintly like a slow heartbeat. Modern chemists recognize this as textbook phosphorescence, the same eerie glow found in certain marine organisms or rotting wood. But in the 16th century, such phenomena were the stuff of witchcraft. What's chilling is that the knights might have harnessed it deliberately. A 1556 inventory from Vittoriosa's armory lists shipments of Bolognese stone and Cypriot earth, substances alchemists knew could absorb and re-emit light. Mixed with varnish, they'd create a primitive glow in the dark coating. Then there's the tactical advantage. Imagine being an Ottoman soldier staring into the darkness before an assault, when suddenly the enemy's armor begins flickering like corpse candles. No wonder survivors spoke of cursed metal. The knight's own records hint at this psychological edge. A letter from Grand Master La Valette mentions equipping sentries with the luminous harness to strike dread into heathen hearts. But one detail defies simple explanation. Multiple accounts describe the glow intensifying when the wearer was wounded, as if blood itself fueled the light. The mystery deepens beneath Malta's streets. In 2003, restorers cleaning a cistern near the Grand Master's palace found a rusted cuirass with its interior coated in a chalky residue. Lab tests identified calcium sulfide, a compound that glows when exposed to moisture, exactly what would happen if a knight sweated inside his armor during battle. More disturbing was the trace element mixed in strontium aluminate, a substance not synthesized until the 19th century. Either this was contamination from modern repairs, or the Hospitallers stumbled upon an alchemical process centuries ahead of its time. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between science and superstition. in a secretive order that studied poisons, mapped uncharted seas, and chased the philosopher's stone. Why wouldn't they weaponize light itself? After all, the greatest terror isn't darkness, it's seeing your enemy illuminated by a glow that shouldn't exist. And if folklore is to be believed, the Lumister still walks Malta's battlements, waiting for the next invasion. You'll know him by his armor and the faint, impossible light that bleeds through the cracks. The Venetian merchant ship Santo Spirito had no business sinking where it did. On a calm June night in 1574, it vanished off the coast of Crete, taking with it a cargo of silks, spices, and one passenger whose belongings didn't match his story. When divers recovered his waterlogged chest 2 centuries later, they expected to find typical merchants' fair ledgers, maybe a few coins. Instead, they pried open the lid to discover bundles of parchment sealed in wax, each covered in what looked like innocuous trade records. But the numbers didn't add up. The ink bled in odd patterns, and tucked between the pages was a silver ring, its underside engraved with the faintest hint of a Maltese cross. This was no merchant. He was Fra Matthew de Clermont, a Hospitaller knight turned master of disguise, and his letters were anything but mundane. Written in a cipher the order called the Wine Merchant's Code, they detailed Ottoman fleet movements with chilling precision, ship counts, troop deployments, even the names of captains who'd accepted Hospitaller bribes. One passage described Suleiman's secret project to build a massive new flagship, its hull reinforced with iron ribs like a dragon's spine. Another warned of a planned attack on Malta's vulnerable northern coast. But the most damning line came at the bottom of the 3rd page, where the ink had pooled into a deliberate stain. The Sultan's admiral wears our colors beneath his own. Why would a knight risk such a mission? The answer lies in the timing. 1574 marked the peak of the Ottoman-Venetian War, a conflict where information was deadlier than cannon fire. The knights had spies everywhere, disguised as fishermen in Istanbul's docks, as physicians in Ottoman camps, even as slaves rowing in the Sultan's own galleys. But de Clermont's role was unique. His cover as a Tuscan merchant gave him access to Venetian officials who'd never suspect a fellow Catholic of colluding with the knights. And Venice, though nominally Christian, was happy to sell intelligence to the highest bidder, including the Ottomans. The real mystery isn't how de Clermont died, but how close he came to succeeding. His final letter, dated just 3 days before the wreck, contained a sketch of the Dardanelles fortifications with weak points circled in charcoal. Had it reached Malta, the knights could have sabotaged the Ottoman supply lines for years. Instead, the sea claimed his secrets, but not all of them. When conservators peeled apart the parchment layers, they found a second, fainter text pressed into the fibers. Written in lemon juice, an ancient spy's trick, it listed 12 names followed by sums of gold. Historians now believe these were turncoats within the Ottoman navy, men whose betrayal might have changed the course of history, if only the Santo Spirito had stayed afloat one more night. Perhaps the most haunting detail comes from the ship's manifest. Listed among the passengers was a mute Turkish boy described as the merchant's servant. No body was recovered, and in the Ottoman archives, a single sentence from that same summer notes the execution of a Christian spy and his silent shadow. The boy's fate, like so much of this story, remains adrift in the tides of history, proof that even the best-laid plots could drown in a whisper. Deep in the Syrian wilderness, where the walls of Margat Castle loom over the coastal mountains, a forgotten spring bubbles up from the rocks, a spring that shouldn't exist. Medieval chronicles tell of wounded Hospitallers stumbling back from battle, their wounds festering, only to emerge days later with scars barely visible. The knights called it the Fons Vitae, the fountain of life, crediting its waters with miraculous healings after prayers to St. John. But was this divine intervention or something far more calculated? The spring's location alone raises questions. It doesn't emerge in the castle's courtyard or some easily accessible grotto. Instead, it trickles from a narrow crevice at the base of Margat's eastern cliff, a spot so difficult to reach that only the most determined or desperate would attempt the climb. Surviving accounts describe a ritualistic approach. Knights had to remove their armor, recite a specific psalm, and drink the water from a silver chalice bearing the order's cross. Failure to follow these steps, one chronicler warns, rendered the waters as common as any other stream. Modern geologists have identified traces of sulfur and lithium in the area's bedrock, minerals known for mild antiseptic and mood-stabilizing properties. Could the knights have enhanced the spring's effects? A 15th-century Arabic manuscript seized during a raid describes Hospitaller brothers secretly adding powdered vitriol to a well, likely copper sulfate, a compound medieval surgeons used to clean wounds. But the real psychological power lay in the ritual itself. By controlling access, mandating prayers, and using sacred vessels, the knights transformed a natural phenomenon into a theatrical display of divine favor. The placebo effect would have been potent. A wounded warrior who believed he'd received heavenly aid might fight through pain that would cripple others. And the timing was no accident. Margat's healings peaked during sieges when morale hung by a thread. After the spring restored a knight who'd taken an arrow through the lung during the 1281 Mamluk assault, defenders reportedly fought like men possessed, buying critical days for reinforcements to arrive. Yet some accounts resist easy explanation. A knight's letter from 1273 describes watching a brother with a gangrenous leg immerse it in the spring only for the blackened flesh to pinken within hours. Even accounting for exaggeration, such rapid recovery defies medieval medicine. Was there more to the waters than minerals and suggestion? Margat's builders may have known something lost to history. The castle sits atop ruins far older, possibly Roman or even Phoenician, cultures that revered therapeutic springs. Perhaps the Hospitallers didn't engineer the miracle, they simply inherited it. The spring's final fate adds another layer of mystery. When Margat fell in 1285, the Mamluks deliberately collapsed the crevice, yet travelers a century later reported a faint smell of sulfur near the rubble, and whispers that the waters still flowed underground, waiting for worthy hands to uncover them again. Whether placebo, alchemy, or something beyond our understanding, one truth remains. In the shadows of Margat, faith and science blurred into something neither could fully explain. The flames of revolution were licking at Europe's borders when Philippe Villiers de l'Isle Adam, last Grand Master of Malta, drew his final breath in 1534. His deathbed wasn't in some fortified palace, but a modest room in Nice, the knights already scattered by Napoleon's advancing forces. Witnesses reported his words came thick and slurred, as if fighting some invisible hand pressing down on his tongue. But two phrases cut through the delirium with unnatural clarity. The vault must never, and 7 keys, 7 gates, then silence. At first glance, this could be dismissed as the ramblings of a dying man. But Villiers was no ordinary leader. He'd spent decades overseeing the knight's most secretive projects, from the labyrinth beneath Valletta to the alchemical workshops of Burgoo. His personal diary, rediscovered in a private collection in 2011, contains entries that make those final words suddenly ominous. One passage from 1532 describes a midnight inspection of the archive beneath the archive, accessed through a sequence of 7 locked doors, each requiring a unique key held by a different high-ranking knight. Another mentions a testament older than Jerusalem, stored there, so volatile that even fire hesitates to touch it. Historians have long speculated about what exactly the knights hid in their deepest vaults. Gold, certainly, sacred relics, almost definitely, but Villiers' phrasing suggests something more unnerving. Medieval archives often used keys as metaphors for ciphers or rituals needed to unlock knowledge. The Templars, before their fall, spoke of 7 seals guarding their greatest secret, and then there's the timing. Just weeks before Villiers' death, Napoleon's agents had begun circling Malta like vultures, their letters boasting of seizing not just an island but a library of forbidden sciences. The most chilling clue lies in what happened after the Grand Master died. His body was interred in Nice, but his personal effects vanished, including an iron ring set with 7 gemstones, one for each of Malta's fortified cities. When French troops finally ransacked the island in 1798, they found the treasury emptied, the reliquaries bare, but one room in Fort St. Angelo remained stubbornly sealed. Its door bore 7 keyholes arranged in a perfect hexagram. No amount of force could breach it. By the time engineers returned with drills, the room inside held nothing but dust and the faintest scent of burnt rosemary, a substance medieval scribes used to preserve parchment from decay. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what Villiers meant, but why he chose those final phrases. Was it a warning, a clue for loyal knights to follow, or something darker, an admission that some doors once opened can never truly be closed again? The answer may still lie buried, waiting for 7 keys that no longer exist, or worse, for someone reckless enough to forge new ones. The air inside Crac des Chevaliers hums with something heavier than history. Visitors climbing its worn steps often pause, fingers brushing stone sun warmed for 8 centuries, when suddenly the light shifts. The ruined arches snap back into place, banners ripple in a breeze that doesn't touch the modern grass, and the clang of unseen blacksmith rings through courtyards empty save for dust. These aren't vague impressions, they're visceral, multisensory flashes reported by tourists, archaeologists, even skeptical journalists. A French architect in 2015 swore she smelled roasting meat and heard laughter in a dialect dead since the Crusades. A Syrian tour guide filmed his group recoiling in unison from the phantom heat of a forge that hadn't burned since Saladin's siege. Science offers explanations, of course. Temporal lobe epilepsy can trigger vivid hallucinations of past eras. Infrasound frequencies below human hearing vibrating through the fortress's limestone might unsettle the inner ear, creating illusions. But Crac's time slips share eerie consistencies. Witnesses describe the same details: a scarlet banner with a white 8-pointed cross fluttering over the inner ward, the scent of beeswax candles mixed with iron from the armory, even the distant chanting of the Veni Creator Spiritus hymn at precise intervals. Too specific for coincidence, too uniform for random neural misfires. The fortress's construction fuels the mystery. Hospitaller engineers incorporated quartz-rich stones into key structures like the chapel and Great Hall. Minerals known to exhibit piezoelectric properties, releasing faint electrical charges under pressure. Some theorists suggest centuries of chanting, marching, and battle vibrations might have recorded events in the stone like a natural phonograph. More radically, Crac sits atop a confluence of ley lines, those hypothetical energy channels pseudoscientists claim amplify psychic phenomena. Whether physics or folklore, the sheer weight of witness accounts demands consideration. Perhaps the most chilling testimony comes from a British veteran who visited in 2011. He entered the tower where legend says wounded knights were left to die during the 1271 siege. His camera captured nothing unusual, but his voice recorder picked up something else, a whisper in medieval Occitan pleading, "Adjuda nos, help us," followed by the unmistakable sound of a sword being drawn. Audio analysts found no evidence of tampering. The veteran, a hardened former Royal Marine, refused to discuss the incident afterward. Crac's time slips raise a darker question. If stones can remember, what else might they reveal? In 2019, a team using ground-penetrating radar discovered a previously unknown chamber beneath the chapel. Syrian authorities sealed it before excavations could begin, citing structural concerns. But workers reported hearing metallic scraping from below, like something heavy being dragged across flagstones long after the site was cleared. Whether echo, imagination, or something more, one truth lingers. In this fortress where time seems to fold, the past might not be as distant as we think. And some memories etched in stone refuse to stay buried. Buried beneath layers of cipher and secrecy in the Vatican archives, a set of letters from 1431 tells a story the Church never wanted told. The correspondence begins innocently enough: routine reports from a Hospitaller knight named Fra Lorenzo di Mondragon, stationed at the cracked des Chevaliers outpost. But halfway through the third parchment, the script shifts. The ink grows lighter, the strokes more hurried, as if the writer's hand trembled. Decrypted centuries later, the words reveal not military updates but poetry. Your laughter is the call to prayer my soul answers before dawn. The recipient, a woman signed only as Nor of the Silver Veil, later identified as the daughter of a powerful Aleppan emir. This wasn't merely a breach of celibacy vows, it was a political earthquake. The knight's survival depended on fragile truces with Muslim rulers, and a romance like this threatened to shatter decades of careful diplomacy. Yet the letters suggest something even more dangerous: shared secrets. Nor's replies, smuggled into the fortress inside bolts of silk, mention the book with 7 seals and ask if Lorenzo's order still guards the gate beneath the moon. Were these lovers exchanging coded references to a Hospitaller mystery, or was their bond deeper than passion? The fallout was swift. When word reached Grand Master Juan Fernandez de Heredia, Lorenzo was recalled to Rhodes under armed guard. But here's where history twists. Instead of execution, he was confined to the island's scriptorium, tasked with copying Arabic medical texts, a punishment suspiciously tailored to his linguistic skills. Meanwhile, Nor's family abruptly left Aleppo for Cairo, her father claiming a pilgrimage of penance. Coincidence, or had both sides quietly negotiated to bury the scandal? Modern scholars piecing together the fragments note an eerie postscript. In 1436, a knight matching Lorenzo's description resurfaces in Malta, his new role listed as Keeper of the Eastern Gate, a title previously unknown in Hospitaller ranks. That same year, Venetian spies reported a veiled woman touring the island's coastal watchtowers under heavy guard. The trail ends there, leaving us to wonder, was this a tragedy of star-crossed lovers, or did two clever souls turn forbidden love into a bridge between worlds? The answer might lie in the letter's most cryptic line, scratched faintly beneath Nor's final signature: "The heart has its own crusades and its own Jerusalem." In the damp underbelly of Fort St. Angelo, where the walls sweat salt from centuries of Mediterranean storms, a team of restorers in 1953 broke through a bricked-up archway and found a chamber that defied explanation. The air inside was stale yet oddly charged, like the stillness before a thunderclap. Their lanterns flickered across rows of weapons, not gleaming ceremonial arms, but swords blackened as if by fire, shields pitted with corrosion no natural rust could explain. Most chilling were the marks on the blades, not the nicks of battle, but precise, almost ritualistic scorings along the edges, as though each weapon had been subjected to the same unnatural force. This was no ordinary armory. Historical records mention the Armeria Nera, the Black Armory, only in passing, a shadowy division of the knights tasked with special undertakings too sensitive for daylight. Some scholars argue these were simply arms reserved for covert night raids, their darkened metal less likely to catch moonlight and betray their wielders. But the artifacts tell a different story. Lab analysis in the 1960s revealed traces of mercury and sulfur fused into the steel, ingredients medieval alchemists associated with eternal darkness rituals. Even stranger, the shields bore faint etchings of a hooded figure carrying not a cross but an inverted torch. Whispers from the Maltese archives suggest this unit answered only to the Grand Master himself. A fragmentary letter from 1589 mentions 12 brothers who walk where others fear to tread, receiving sealed orders before slipping into Ottoman ports disguised as merchants. Their most infamous alleged mission, the poisoning of Suleiman the Magnificent's favorite admiral in 1565, an act that stalled the invasion of Malta for a critical season. Yet the room's true enigma lies in what wasn't there. No armor, no helms, just those eerie swords, each resting on a square of lead, a metal believed to block supernatural forces. Local legend claims the weapons grow warm to the touch during storms, though archivists dismiss this as humidity. But one detail chills the bones. The chamber's walls were lined with a thin layer of volcanic ash, identical to deposits found near Mount Etna. Was this a safeguard against corrosion or containment for something far older than the knights themselves? The last word belongs to a dying knight's confession, scribbled in a margin of the fort's logbook in 1702. We do not wield the shadows. We bind them, whether metaphor or madness. It lingers like the smell of sulfur in that sealed room, proof that some battles leave marks even time can't erase. In the heart of Sao Paulo's bustling metropolis, behind an unmarked door in a nondescript office building, a group gathers every full moon under the sign of the eight-pointed cross. They call themselves the Cavalleros da Luz, the Knights of Light, and claim to possess not just the bloodline of the Hospitallers, but something far more precious, a ritual book smuggled out of Malta before Napoleon's invasion, its pages filled with symbols matching those found in the vaults of Acre and Rhodes. Their leader, a charismatic historian turned mystic named Eduardo Vasconcelos, displays a weathered parchment he insists is a 15th-century oath signed by a fugitive knight in the Amazon rainforest. The ink glints oddly under UV light, revealing subtext in a cipher no academic has cracked. But how much of this is verifiable history and how much is romantic fabrication? Genealogists who have examined the group's ancestry papers note glaring gaps, conveniently dead ends in Portuguese colonial records that could theoretically hide a knight's escape to Brazil. The ritual book's provenance is equally murky. While its vellum matches medieval sources, carbon dating places it somewhere between 1650 and 1820, leaving centuries unaccounted for. Then there's the peculiar detail that many of its lost rites bear striking resemblance to 18th-century Masonic rituals, raising suspicions of a later fabrication. Yet some anomalies defy easy dismissal. In 2017, a metallurgist analyzing the group's prized relic, a dagger allegedly carried by Grand Master de Elisle Adam, found traces of a rare Maltese alloy consistent with early 16th century smithing techniques. More intriguing is the blade's triangular cross-section, a design unique to Hospitaller weapons from that era. Even skeptics pause at the chemical signature of its steel, which matches ore from a now-flooded Rhodes mine the Knights exclusively controlled. Across the Atlantic, other claimants emerge with equally bold assertions. A Maltese foundation calling itself Sovereign Legacy displays a charter they say was penned by Villiers himself, granting perpetual authority to those who guard the silent knowledge. Scholars note the wax seal's consistency with 16th century examples, but the parchment's phrasing contains anachronisms, including a Portuguese phrase that wouldn't enter Maltese usage for another 100 years. Meanwhile, in Prague, an esoteric order practices what they call the true medicine of St. John, a blend of herbalism and chanting they insist originated in Crac des Chevalier's secret infirmary. Their centerpiece, a mummified hand allegedly belonging to a Hospitaller surgeon, its fingers still clutching a scalpel engraved with the same seven-pointed star from Acre's chamber. The loudest voices, however, come from online forums where self-styled Hospitaller revivalists trade dubious artifacts and wild theories. One viral post showcases a digital scan of a lost map to Rhodes' treasure, which turned out to be a clever Photoshop job based on a 19th century pirate novel. Another seller auctioned authentic Hospitaller sand from the Holy Land, later exposed as dyed grit from a Sardinian beach. Amid this circus of claims, one thread connects the credible and the outlandish, the Knights' obsession with secrecy. If genuine heirs exist, wouldn't they operate exactly as their forebears did, hiding in plain sight, letting others dismiss them as frauds while preserving what truly matters? Perhaps the most telling clue comes from an unlikely source. The Vatican's own archivists quietly admit that in 1946, a Brazilian cardinal requested access to documents on Hospitaller activities in the New World. The request was denied, but the file's existence suggests someone, somewhere, believed the trail was real. Whether charlatans, dreamers, or genuine keepers of a flame, these modern claimants force us to ask a deeper question. In an order built on layers of deception, how would we even recognize the truth if we found it? The Knights' greatest trick might not have been hiding their secrets, it was making sure we'd never stop searching. The Knights Hospitaller left behind a trail of riddles that still taunt historians today. Vanished fleets swallowed by the Mediterranean, fortresses abandoned mid-meal, sacred relics pulsing with eerie power. Consider the enigma of their missing treasury from Rhodes, hauled away under the Ottomans' noses without a trace, or the whispered experiments in Malta's underground labs, where alchemists might have stumbled upon glow in the dark armor centuries ahead of their time. Then there's the chamber beneath Acre's ruins, where the walls themselves seem to hum with forgotten knowledge, its secrets buried beneath defaced symbols, all except that Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its tail, left untouched as if by design. Even their ghosts refuse to rest. At Bodrum Castle, spectral sentries march in formation, their footsteps echoing from a mass grave no one can explain. In Cracked des Chevaliers, visitors swear the stones replay moments from the past like a crackling vinyl record, blacksmiths' hammers, Latin chants, the clang of swords that haven't swung in 800 years. And what of the mummified finger of St. John, radiating nightmares and fever wherever it surfaces? Was it truly a relic or something far older the Knights merely inherited? Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what they hid, but why. Every vault, every coded ledger, every poison-tipped dagger suggests an order guarding more than gold. They were curators of a truth too volatile for the medieval world. That lead-sealed manuscript Villiers de l'Isle Adam called the Testament older than Jerusalem, the books that burned without flame, smuggled from Acre. The prophecy scrawled by Dobberson that predicted Rhodes' fall to the hour. Were these just legends or fragments of a puzzle the Knights themselves couldn't fully assemble? Your journey doesn't end here. Walk the battlements of Malta's forts at dusk and listen for the whispers in the limestone. Trace the carvings in Rhodes' cobbled streets where the seven-pointed star still lurks in plain sight. Or dive into the Vatican's locked archives where a single uncensored page might rewrite everything we know. Share your theories below. Was the Phantom Fleet shipwrecked, or did it slip through some unseen door? Did the Knights master alchemy, or were they merely the latest in a long line of keepers for knowledge far older? As the chronicler William of Tyre once wrote of the Order's last days in Jerusalem, they carried their secrets like wounds, deep, unhealed, and bound to bleed anew when the moon turns dark. The Knights may be dust, but their riddles still breathe, and somewhere in the space between history and myth, the truth waits.